I feel as though today, which is the day of Pentecost in the cycle of the Christian year, that I am, in fact, reenacting that parable, that threshold that marked a new season within the life of the friends of Jesus. The day of Pentecost is observed 50 days after Easter. And while the Easter event is a very celebrative and powerful and breaking out of the tomb event, in fact, I think what I suggested this year, 50 days ago, was that resurrection experiences rarely happen within 3 days of a death. And that the experience of resurrection is in itself a season. And so the 50 days of Easter, which we are just completing today, are days when we're trying to figure out what this new risen life is about. 50 days. That's about right, or not. I think we'll be trying to figure out what this new life is about for a lot longer than that. But I decided that I needed to muster all of my courage and find a way of taking a step forward. So let's talk about that event. We have friends of Jesus who are huddled together in a room, still anxious and afraid. Their teacher had been massacred. And as his friends, it is no surprise that they would think that their lives would be in danger as well. And then the parable of the Pentecost story suggests that suddenly the wind of God blew through them, and that they were taken up with holy breath and moved forward with a new kind of courage. But it wasn't hiding away in the room. It was finding themselves out in the world, in the streets of Jerusalem, with people from every nation and every race. And we are told that suddenly all of those friends of Jesus found themselves speaking in languages that everybody understood. And a whole new community was born. A beloved, inclusive community was born right under the noses of the empire. And we are told that that community, fueled by compassion and courage, went on to set the world on fire, living out of a very different narrative than the domination narrative of Caesar, but living under a narrative of generosity and hospitality and justice. And it became a community that was populated by all of those folk who were never quite included in the mainstream. Ken Sehested speaks of it like this, that God's resurrection moment became God's resurrection movement. So I've come out of my own hiding house this morning, thinking that some sort of movement was required today. And also being very aware that this pericope, this narrative within our tradition, marked by tongues of fire, is somehow mirrored in the streets of every city around the world after the death of George Floyd. There are fires in the street now. And I have an idea that they are of the same source. We are in the midst of a world in travail, in rebirth, and we needed to be in the midst of a world in travail, in rebirth. And it will take more than 50 days. So let me speak to some facts. I was part of a webinar this week that included 1,000 employees from Christian organizations across Canada. We met with Dr. Strang on cyberspace, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Nova Scotia. And he confirmed for all of us what I think we all knew, and that is that there will not be a going back when it comes to how we gather as Christian communities. That we are now in a new normal, and in the event or at the point at which we are allowed to gather, it will be under strict protocols. And I think I was thrown into that sinking feeling again of how do we move forward as the beloved community. But then in the back of my mind were those words by hymn writer Brian Wren that go like this: "Come build the church, not heaps of stone, but friends of Jesus, spirit blown." Friends of Jesus, spirit blown, having to discern again how we will live out of the most profound invitation by our God to live with generosity and hospitality and justice. Some of you might remember this day 15 years ago. It was 15 years ago on the day of Pentecost that I preached for the call at St. Andrew's, Picton. I remember my text then as well. It was David and Goliath, and on that day, I challenged you as a congregation to see yourself as a small but mighty force for change and hope and grace and justice and connectedness and hospitality and generosity in this community. And as my examples of how small communities, single people could have such a profound effect on the world, I reminded us of who we as Canadians had voted as our two most favorite Canadians that year. Remember that series by the CBC? So you might recall that the person who rose to the top was Tommy Douglas, just a small town Baptist preacher from Saskatchewan, who is the reason that we have Medicare, social Medicare today. And second in line was Terry Fox, whose courage, despite his challenges, created a whole movement and acknowledgement of the role that cancer plays in our lives. And Terry Fox mobilized a whole community of Canadians to get behind the fight against cancer. So we have many models for courage and daring and boldness. And within the biblical text, again and again, we have these parables, these stories about how God is breaking in and inviting us to be part of co-creating a world made new. So I'm going to close this morning with some words by Nadia Bolz-Weber, who is a Lutheran pastor in the States. She writes, I do not know when we can gather again in our buildings to express wonder and awe and gratitude for the gift of life and love. So for now, I just ask, when I sing alone in my kitchen to each song on Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life album, that it could be counted as praise. And that when I read the news and my heart tightens in my chest, may it be counted as a prayer of lament. And that when my eyes brighten in a smile behind my mask as I thank the cashier, may it be counted as passing the peace. And that when I water my plants and wash my dishes and take a shower, may it be counted as remembering my baptism. And that when the tears come and my shoulders shake and my breathing falters, may it be counted as prayer. And that when I stumble upon a Tabitha Brown video and hear her grace and love of you, may it be counted as hearing a homily. And that as I sit at table in my apartment and eat one more homemade meal slowly, joyfully, with nothing else demanding my time or attention, may it be counted as communion. So, good friends, we need to cross over this threshold out of our places of fear and hiding and into a place where we can breathe deeply of holy breath and where we can live out of our baptism as a people who agreed to be friends of Jesus, spirit blown. This is our deepest identity. Let us walk across this threshold into this new season of Pentecost together, knowing that we are not alone, but we are in fact members of a planetary community that is and has always been worshiping and praising and singing and dancing and growing boldly. And let us, more than anything else, commit ourselves to loving what matters. Peace be with you, good friends. On this day of Pentecost, like no other, on this day of Pentecost that was very, very much like that first day of Pentecost, we are in such good company.